At 8:42 p.m. on Thanksgiving night, the turkey was cold and my cheek was bleeding. The house smelled of roasted pecans and bourbon glaze, but under it there was that sour smell of tension that no candle could mask. My mother Diane stood frozen at the kitchen counter, her wine glass trembling in her hand. My father Frank still held the empty stem of his own glass red wine dripping onto the carpet like blood. My brother Tyler leaned back in his chair, smirking as if this whole thing was entertainment. I pressed a napkin to my face and felt the sting of salt in the cut. He had thrown the glass. My father. Not at the wall, not by accident. At me. And now the silence that followed was worse than the impact. I heard only the faint buzz of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the clock over the mantel. No one moved. 10 minutes earlier, we had been pretending to be a family. Tyler had bragged about winning $500 at poker. Mom had laughed too loudly, pretending not to notice how her eyes darted toward Dad for approval. I had brought a casserole of pie and the naive hope that maybe this year would be different. I should have known better. It started when Tyler mocked me for being single. "You still live alone, right, Lena?" He said it like it was a disease. 36, no husband, no kids. Just a nurse. He stretched the word nurse like it was something dirty. Dad chuckled and added, "Maybe if you shared some of that nurse money, your brother wouldn't be struggling." Mom had smiled that polite hostage smile she wore in every family photo. I told them I had already sent Mom $5,000 last year and I wasn't a bank. I said it calmly, evenly. That's when Dad's face changed. The charming mask dropped. His eyes narrowed and his jaw flexed like a storm cloud forming. He told me I owed this family. He said blood was supposed to mean something. I told him respect was supposed to mean something too. The room cracked open. The wine glass flew before I even saw his hand move. It hit my cheekbone and shattered warm wine spilling down my neck. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The pain wasn't the worst part. It was their faces. Tyler laughed. Mom looked at her plate. No one said stop. No one said anything. I pushed back from the table. The chair screeched against the tile like a scream no one else would give me. My pulse was roaring in my ears. I said quietly, "You'll never touch me or my money again." Dad muttered ungrateful under his breath. Tyler smirked. I grabbed my coat, my purse, and walked toward the door. No one followed. The night air hit my face like a slap made of ice. It was raining, the kind that smells like metal and dirt, and I walked to my car with the napkin still pressed against my cheek. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I could see my mother through the kitchen window. She wasn't crying. She was rinsing dishes. By the time I reached my apartment in Dallas, my hair was soaked and my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "You left without cleaning up. You embarrassed your father." I stared at it until the letters blurred. My reflection in the dark window looked like a stranger one with a small red line across her face and eyes that had finally stopped hoping. I took a long shower scrubbing until the skin on my cheek burned again. When I stepped out, my phone lit up with a dozen missed calls from Tyler. I ignored them. I wrapped myself in a blanket, sat on the couch, and stared at the ceiling. For the first time, I wasn't angry. I was empty. Midnight came quietly. The only light in the room came from the soft blue glow of my phone charger. I wanted to lose myself in something simple, maybe check my work messages, confirm a supply order for the small medical nonprofit I ran on weekends. I unlocked my phone, opened the banking app linked to our program fund, and froze. The balance was 0. I blinked, thinking I'd opened the wrong account. I refreshed the page. Still 0. Then I scrolled down and saw the line of transactions. 6 withdrawals, all within 2 hours. My chest tightened. Each amount was precise surgical, like someone knew exactly how to drain it without triggering fraud alerts. $78,000. Gone. My first instinct was denial. I checked the timestamps, the device logins. Then I saw the last login location, Arlington, Texas. My parents' suburb. My vision tunneled. I whispered, "No. Not again." But deep down, I already knew. Earlier that evening, Mom had asked me to help her fix their Wi-Fi. The old laptop had been slow, barely functioning. I remembered sitting at the dining room table entering my email to download a driver typing in my password while Tyler stood behind me pretending to watch football. My stomach turned. They hadn't just hurt me, they had planned it. They'd watched me type every key. I stared at the screen until my eyes stung. My pulse slowed, then steadied. There was a part of me that wanted to throw the phone to Scream to call and demand an explanation. But I didn't. I just sat there in silence, the same silence I'd grown up in, only now I understood it. It was the silence of people who take and people who endure. At 12:07 a.m., I opened a new note on my phone and typed 8 words. They didn't just hit me, they hacked me. Then I saved it. The sound of the phone locking echoed like a door closing for good. Outside, the rain stopped. The apartment felt cold but clean, like the world had paused. I didn't cry, I didn't curse. I just breathed, because this time I wasn't going to endure. I was going to end it. Before I tell you how I handled this, tell me where you're watching from. I want to know if you've ever had to protect your peace from people who share your blood, and if you have hit that subscribe button because what I'm about to tell you isn't just about losing money. It's about losing the illusion that family means safety. I used to think I was the problem. Every holiday, every reunion, I'd walk into that house hoping for peace and walk out carrying invisible bruises. You learn to rationalize it when you grow up in chaos. You say dad's just stressed, mom's just tired, Tyler's just joking. But deep down, you know the truth. They aren't sorry. They're comfortable. And you're convenient. That night, sitting on my couch, I scrolled through those bank transactions again. My pulse didn't race anymore. It was steady, deliberate. Every number told a story I already knew too well. The first transfer had gone to my father's name, the second to my brother's, the rest to accounts I didn't recognize. There was no mystery left, just clarity. I thought about calling them, about screaming, about demanding they fix it. But then I remembered the sound of that glass hitting my face, the way Mom's eyes slid away, the way Tyler laughed. That was the sound of every time I'd ever tried to reason with them. It always ended the same way. Me bleeding them, pretending it never happened. So I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't even cry. Instead, I whispered something I'd never said before. Enough. Maybe you know that word too. The kind of enough that doesn't mean tired, but done. The kind that doesn't come with hope attached, because this wasn't the first time they hurt me. It was just the first time they took everything tangible enough for the world to see. The bruises always healed. The apologies never came. But $78,000 that left a paper trail. I know some of you watching will say it's just money, but it wasn't. That account held the future I'd been building for 5 years. The clinic fund, the one meant to help nurses afford trauma training in rural hospitals. I'd built it dollar by dollar, shift by shift. I'd skipped vacations. I'd worked Christmas Eve, and they took it without blinking. So here's my promise to you and to myself. I won't be their silence anymore. If you've ever had to choose between blood and peace, between forgiveness and self-respect, then stay with me. Because what happened next wasn't revenge. It was awakening. My story didn't begin that Thanksgiving night. It began long before I ever understood that love could come with bruises you couldn't show a doctor. I grew up in a 2-story house on the edge of Arlington, Texas, with beige siding and a porch swing that creaked whenever the wind shifted. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary home, a father who grilled on weekends, a mother who volunteered at church, 2 kids who smiled in school photos. But every wall in that house remembered something no camera ever captured. My father, Frank Brooks, was the kind of man people described as larger than life. At least that's what they said at barbecues when he was telling stories about clients who didn't exist and business deals that never happened. He was a consultant, though no one could say what he consulted on. In truth, he was a man who fed on admiration and control. If people stopped clapping, he created chaos just to make the noise start again. My mother, Diane, was his perfect accomplice. She believed in appearances the way some people believe in God. When he yelled, she smiled tighter. When he hit, she said, "He's under pressure." When I cried, she pressed her fingers to her lips and whispered, "Do you want to make things worse?" Her silence wasn't protection, it was complicity. Tyler, My younger brother was born 2 years after me and grew up learning that in our house, power excused everything. He broke things, lied, gambled away lunch money, and Mom would laugh, saying, "Boys will be boys." When I got straight A's, she said, "Don't brag. You'll make your brother feel bad." I learned early that in our family effort was invisible, but excuses were sacred. My earliest memory of violence was on a humid summer night when I was 9. Frank came home late, reeking of beer and gasoline. The air conditioner had broken again, and Mom's voice had that careful tremor she used when she was trying to keep him calm. He slammed his keys on the table, shouting about how no one respected him, how the world was full of idiots, how Mom should have had dinner ready. I hid behind the kitchen wall, clutching my stuffed bear, and watched him shove a plate to the floor. It shattered. Mom knelt down to clean it, apologizing. And then he kicked her. Once. Twice. The sound it made wasn't loud, but I remember it clearer than any Christmas carol. I screamed. He turned toward me, and I froze. He didn't hit me that night. He just stared, and in that stare, I learned something worse than fear. I learned that love could look right at you and still choose violence. By the time I was 12, I had become an expert at reading footsteps. I knew the difference between dad with good news and dad with bourbon. I also knew that Mom's smiles got tighter after the second glass. One night, she sat on my bed and said, "You can't judge your father. He's just under a lot of pressure." I asked her why pressure always looked like bruises. She told me to pray. When I was 16, the police came for the first time. A neighbor called after hearing shouting and a crash. Frank had thrown a chair. It missed Mom, but not the window. When the officers arrived, Mom said it was an accident. I told the truth. I said he had hit her before. The officer's expression changed from sympathy to discomfort. He told me to stay somewhere safe for the night. Frank was taken to the station but released the next morning. He didn't hit me that day. He waited a week. It happened in the garage, the smell of oil and sweat thick in the air. He said I had humiliated him. He said good daughters didn't turn their fathers into criminals. When he struck me, it wasn't just pain. It was betrayal shaped like a hand. He called it discipline. Mom called it misunderstanding. I called it the moment I stopped believing family meant safety. I left home 2 years later with a scholarship to study nursing at the University of Texas. I had 2 suitcases, $400 from a part-time job, and the kind of resolve that only grows in silence. My mother cried when I hugged her goodbye, but her tears weren't for me. They were for the version of herself she had to face when I left. Tyler stood on the porch and said, "Don't act like you're better than us." I told him I wasn't. I was just done pretending. College was the first time I slept without flinching at every sound, but even peace felt unfamiliar. I worked 2 jobs, library assistant and weekend waitress, to cover what the scholarship didn't. I studied human anatomy and emergency trauma care, learning how to fix what people break. Maybe that was why I chose the ER. You can't heal chaos, but you can manage it. Meanwhile, back home, the stories trickled through relatives. Frank had reinvented himself as an investment consultant. Tyler dropped out of community college after 1 semester and bounced between odd jobs. Mom called sometimes, her voice syrupy with guilt. She always said she missed me. Then she'd slip in the reason for the call. "We're having some trouble paying the mortgage. Could you help just this once?" And I did for a while, because guilt is a muscle and mine was overdeveloped. After graduation, I took a position in a Dallas trauma center. I learned to stay calm while people bled out to keep moving even when the room spun with adrenaline. The ER became the only place where I felt in control. At home, I lived small. No fancy clothes, no expensive furniture, no distractions. Every dollar went toward my goal to build a small nonprofit fund that would train nurses in rural hospitals for trauma care. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. It was mine. Years passed. The calls from my family became less about love and more about need. Mom's tone changed from soft to desperate. Tyler's had a rough patch. He just needs help getting back on his feet. Frank left voicemails filled with charm and promises. "You're doing so well, sweetheart. We're proud of you. Maybe you could invest in a family venture. I've got a contact in Houston. This could triple your savings." I said no. Politely at first, then firmly. The silence that followed was familiar. When you stop feeding a parasite, it doesn't disappear. It just waits. 3 years before Thanksgiving, I caved one last time. Mom called crying. If we don't make this payment, we could lose the house. She promised they'd pay me back in 6 months. I wired $8,000. 6 months turned into a year, then two. The next time I brought it up, Dad laughed. Family doesn't need receipts, Lena. It's all the same money. That was when I set my final boundary. No more loans, no more rescues. He hung up on me. For the first time, I didn't call back. That was the year I turned 33. I remember sitting in my apartment reading medical case studies when an email from Mom appeared. The subject line read, "Family dinner, let's heal." She said Dad had mellowed, Tyler was working again, and they wanted a fresh start. I didn't respond, but every holiday that passed after that, I felt the same ache, a tug between caution and nostalgia. I wanted to believe people could change. I wanted to believe my mother's new church group and Dad's therapy sessions meant something. But people don't heal in silence. They rot. And the rot doesn't smell until it's too late. By the time that Thanksgiving invitation arrived, I had almost convinced myself that time could fix what therapy hadn't. That was the delusion I carried like a candle into a hurricane. I told myself I was going for Mom. I told myself Tyler had grown up. I told myself Dad was too old to hurt anyone now. I told myself everything except the truth, that I was still the child trying to earn love from people who only understood control. You learn to live around trauma like it's furniture you can't move. You make space for it, you step over it, you pretend it belongs. Until one day, you trip. And then you realize it never stopped hurting. You just stopped noticing. That Thanksgiving was the trip. The moment my silence ended. 3 years had passed since the last phone call that ended with my father hanging up on me. Silence had settled between us like dust in an abandoned house. I told myself I preferred it that way. I'd built a quiet life in Dallas, steady shifts at the trauma center, late-night coffee runs with coworkers, and weekends spent fine-tuning the nonprofit project that had become my second heartbeat. I wasn't rich, but I was free. Freedom has a sound, you know. It's the click of your own key turning in your own lock. For 3 years, that was enough. Then one Friday in early November, a cream-colored envelope appeared in my mailbox. The handwriting stopped me before I even saw the return address. I hadn't seen my mother's cursive in years, but I could still recognize the way she looped her capital D like it was performing for someone. The card inside smelled faintly of cinnamon and artificial hope. In gold script it read, "Thanksgiving dinner, let's heal as a family." Beneath it, her signature in blue ink and a heart. A heart she had never drawn on any note before. I should have thrown it away. I told myself that as I stood by the trash can, but I didn't. Instead, I set it on the counter like a ticking clock. For days, I ignored it. But the thing about silence is that it gets heavy. You start to hear it breathing. By the fourth night, curiosity and guilt had already begun their familiar tug-of-war. When my phone rang the next morning and Tyler's name appeared, I almost didn't answer. I hadn't spoken to him in nearly 2 years, not since I refused to fund his latest business venture, a poker livestream that lasted 3 weeks before he gambled away the camera equipment. I let the phone buzz twice before picking up. His voice came through loud and easy, as if no time had passed. "Hey sis, Mom sent you the invite, right? She's making your favorite pecan pie. Said she's using real bourbon this time." The casual cheer in his tone was surreal. I asked, "What's this about, Ty?" He laughed. "It's Thanksgiving. We're family." "Don't make it weird." I heard Dad's voice in the background, low and muffled, saying something I couldn't make out. Tyler added quickly, "Mom really wants you there. She's been talking about how much she misses you." I said I'd think about it, but I already knew I would go. Not because I believed them, but because I wanted proof. Closure, maybe. You can only replay old memories in your head for so long before you need to see if the ghosts have aged. The drive to Arlington took less than an hour. The roads were slick with rain, and by the time I turned onto their street, the sun was setting behind gray clouds that looked like old bruises. The house hadn't changed. The same beige siding, the same porch swing, though the creek was gone. Maybe it had finally broken. The lawn was manicured too perfect with a welcome home flag fluttering near the mailbox. Mom opened the door before I even reached it. "Lena," she said too brightly. She looked thinner, her hair shorter, her smile stretched to breaking. She smelled like vanilla candles and anxiety. "You look wonderful," she said, hugging me quickly already, glancing over her shoulder toward the dining room. "They're waiting." They meant Dad and Tyler. I stepped inside, my boots squeaking on the polished floor. The house felt wrong, not just tidy, but staged. New furniture all matching, all slightly off in color like replicas of something they couldn't afford. A large flat-screen TV flickered silently with a football game. On the wall above it hung a framed motivational quote, "Family is forever." Dad was in his usual spot at the head of the table, a glass of wine in hand. He stood when he saw me, arms open. "There's my girl," he said, voice honey smooth, the same tone he used with clients who hadn't realized yet they were being conned. "Dallas treating you well." "Busy," I said. He nodded, gesturing to the seat across from him. Tyler sat next to him, scrolling through his phone, a faint grin tugging at his mouth. Dinner began like a rehearsal of peace. Mom served turkey with glazed carrots. Dad talked about consulting work with investors in Houston. Tyler chimed in about a new crypto opportunity. Every word was practiced, every smile slightly delayed. I realized then this dinner wasn't about healing. It was about presentation. They wanted something. Mom poured me wine and asked about my work. "Still saving lives every night," she said, her tone sugar-sweet. Dad added, "You must be doing well for yourself. Nurses make decent money, huh?" Tyler laughed softly without looking up. "Yeah, maybe she can invest in my new project." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, thanks. My money's tied up in something meaningful." Dad's eyes flickered. "You still running that little foundation of yours, nonprofit," I corrected. "We're expanding." "That's impressive," he said, voice tightening around the word. "You always did think big." Then with a grin that didn't reach his eyes, he added, "Maybe you can teach your brother a thing or two about success." Tyler snorted. "Sure. Maybe she can teach me how to be a saint, too." Mom laughed a half-second too late. I stared at the wine in my glass, at the reflection of the chandelier trembling in the surface. This was the same pattern dressed in new clothes, the same stage, the same script, only this time I wasn't their audience. As dinner went on, the conversation bent toward money again, the way rivers find old paths. Dad asked about my savings, about property, about investment diversification. Tyler mentioned a friend who could double returns. Every word pressed closer, circling me like vultures pretending to be doves. I finally said, "I'm not lending anyone money. I came for dinner, not a pitch." The silence that followed was the kind you could taste metallic and sour. Dad's smile faltered. Tyler leaned back in his chair, watching him waiting. Mom started to say something, but Dad cut her off with a chuckle that sounded like a warning. "We're just talking, sweetheart. Don't get defensive." The rest of the meal passed in fragments, laughter too loud, jokes too sharp, the faint thud of footsteps above us where no one lived anymore. By the time dessert came, I had already decided to leave early. But before I could, Mom brought out her phone and said, "Oh, before you go, could you help with the Wi-Fi? The laptop won't connect. It has the slideshow from old Thanksgivings. I wanted to play it for everyone." Her voice was too bright, her timing too perfect. I should have seen the setup, but part of me still wanted to believe her. That tiny, naive piece that still believed in healing. I said yes. I followed her into the study where the old laptop sat on the desk screen flickering. I typed in my email, entered a password, downloaded the driver she needed. Tyler hovered in the doorway, pretending to text. I thought nothing of it. When I returned to the table, the slideshow played softly on the TV. Grainy photos of birthdays, camping trips, Christmas mornings. Everyone looked happy. Everyone looked like strangers I used to know. The slideshow played while the room filled with that uneasy stillness that only comes before something breaks. Pictures of us smiling, laughing, pretending. I could hear my younger self giggling through the old speakers, and it made the air feel heavy, almost sticky. Mom wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. "Look at us," she said softly. "Back when everything was simple." Dad's chuckle came sharp. "Simple." "Because we didn't have anyone judging us back then." He looked at me when he said it, smiling like it was a joke, but his eyes were hard. Tyler laughed under his breath. I set my fork down. "No one's judging anyone," I said, keeping my voice level. "You always think you're above us," Lena Tyler muttered. Just because you have a degree and a job doesn't make you better. I leaned back in my chair. I never said I was better, Ty. I said I was done cleaning up your messes. He laughed louder, that short, ugly sound that never reached his eyes. Wow! There it is. Miss Perfect finally says what she thinks. Dad's hand tightened around his wine glass. You talk to your brother with respect. Respect is earned, I said quietly. And you've both spent a lifetime spending mine like it was spare change. The air thinned. Even the slideshow seemed to dim, the smiling faces flickering like ghosts that couldn't bear to watch what was about to happen. Mom whispered, "Not tonight, please," but no one listened. Dad turned to me, his expression shifting from performance to pure control. You think you're some big shot because you wear scrubs and hand out advice? You're still the same ungrateful little girl who left her family behind. I left the violence behind, I said, my pulse pounding, but my voice steady. There's a difference. The glass hit the table with a crack that made Mom flinch. Red wine spilled over the edge, running across the linen tablecloth in a slow, dark stream. Dad stood towering, his face red, the veins in his neck visible. Don't you dare talk to me like that, or what I asked. You'll throw another glass. Tyler's grin widened as if waiting for the show to start. You should sit down, sis, before you embarrass yourself again. Embarrass myself, I repeated. That's funny. I didn't realize standing up for myself was embarrassing. Mom reached for my arm. Lena, please, let's just eat. I shook her off gently. No, Mom. Not this time. I could feel the years of silence pressing against my chest, every swallowed word rising like steam. I said, you wanted me here to pretend everything was fine. To pretend you didn't ask for money, didn't lie, didn't steal. But it's all the same cycle and I'm done playing along. Dad's voice dropped low, the kind that had always come before impact. You ungrateful. His hand moved before I saw it. The sound came first, a sharp, wet crack that split the air. My head jerked to the side. For a second, I saw nothing but light. The taste of iron filled my mouth. Then silence. Tyler's chair creaked as he leaned back smirking. Told you to shut up, he said. Mom gasped, but it was the soft kind, the kind that comes from surprise, not outrage. Frank, she whispered. Please. He stood over me, breathing hard. You don't talk to your father like that in this house. I lifted my hand to my cheek. It was wet, but not just from tears. I looked up at him, at Tyler, at Mom. None of them looked away. That was the moment I realized the truth. It wasn't one slap. It was years of them delivered in silence, wrapped in excuses. This one just happened to draw blood. I rose slowly. My chair scraped against the floor. Again, another scream no one heard. You'll never touch me or my money again, I said, my voice trembling, but cold. Dad sneered. Your money. Our family made you who you are. No, I said. You made me survive who you are. Tyler laughed, then pushed his chair back hard enough to rattle the table. Oh, come on. Don't be so dramatic. You've always loved being the victim. I learned it from watching you, I said. The words landed like a slap of their own. For the first time, his smirk faltered. Mom's voice shook. Stop it! All of you! This isn't what tonight was supposed to be. No, I said. It's exactly what it's always been. I grabbed my coat. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, adrenaline maybe, or the feeling of a cage door finally opening. I looked at my father one last time. He looked smaller now, his power shrinking with every heartbeat. You can keep your dinner, I said. I'm keeping my peace. I walked toward the front door. The hallway seemed longer than I remembered, the light harsher. My reflection passed in the mirror beside the entryway, flushed cheek red mark blooming like war paint. I didn't look away. Outside, the rain had started again, harder this time. It came down in sheets, cold and relentless. I stepped into it, the shock of it grounding me. Behind me, the house stayed quiet. No one called after me. No one apologized. Just the faint hum of the dishwasher starting up, as if the evening could be rinsed clean. By the time I reached my car, my hair was plastered to my face, my breath fogging in the cold. I sat behind the wheel, gripping it so tightly my knuckles ached. The engine hummed to life, soft and steady when nothing else was. I didn't drive right away. I sat there letting the rhythm of the rain against the windshield drown out the echo of his voice. I thought of the slideshow still playing on their TV, frozen on an image of my 10th birthday, candles glowing my father's arm around my shoulders. The perfect illusion. I wondered if they'd watch it again after I left, if they'd see what I saw now that even in those pictures my smile never reached my eyes. When I finally put the car in gear, I didn't look back. The streetlights turned the wet pavement into rivers of gold. My cheek throbbed with every heartbeat, a reminder that pain doesn't always destroy, it clarifies. I whispered to myself, barely audible over the wipers, "Never again." By the time I pulled into my apartment parking lot, it was close to midnight. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me. A message from Mom. "You left without cleaning up. You embarrassed your father." I laughed once, short and sharp. Then I deleted the message. I didn't know it yet, but that slap had done something years of therapy couldn't. It had burned away the last thread tying me to that house. I didn't just walk out of my parents' home that night. I walked out of their version of me. By the time I reached my apartment, the rain had slowed to a whisper. My building was quiet, the kind of silence that comes only after midnight. I kicked off my soaked boots, hung my coat on the hook, and caught my reflection in the mirror by the door. My cheek was swollen, a deep red mark blooming beneath the skin, the faint outline of his ring etched like a signature. For a moment, I just stood there watching the water drip from my hair onto the hardwood floor. It wasn't just rain. It was everything that had built up for years, fear, shame, hope, all washing off at once. I wanted to sleep, but sleep felt like surrender. So I made tea instead, though I didn't drink it. I sat on the couch with the mug cooling in my hands, staring at nothing. The apartment smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender from the hand lotion I used after every shift. My life had become clinical, predictable, safe. Until tonight. Now everything hummed with an unfamiliar electricity, like the moment before a storm you can't see yet but know is coming. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I didn't want to look, but habit made me. Tyler again. A single message. "You overreacted. Dad's just old school. Stop being so dramatic." Then another seconds later, "You'll regret walking out." I stared at the words until they blurred. I should have blocked him then, but part of me wanted the proof. Proof that the cruelty wasn't in my head. Proof that they were exactly who I'd always feared they were. I set the phone down, grabbed a clean towel, and pressed it gently against my face. The sting made my eyes water. I breathed through it. The pain grounded me. When I finally reached for my laptop, it wasn't because I wanted distraction, it was because I needed to anchor myself to something rational. I had paperwork to check invoices for the nonprofit's upcoming project. Numbers had always made sense. They never gaslighted. They never lied. I logged into my work email, then the bank account linked to our small medical fund. The load screen took longer than usual. At first, I thought it was a connection issue. Then the numbers appeared. I blinked once, twice. The balance read $0. I stared at it, waiting for the error to correct itself. The brain does strange things when it collides with shock. It bargains, it denies, it refreshes. I did all of that. The balance didn't change. I scrolled through the transaction history. There were 6 wire transfers, all within 2 hours, each for an amount precise enough to avoid automatic fraud flags. $78,000. Gone. My pulse spiked, but my body stayed unnervingly still. It wasn't panic, it was calculation. Training kicked in. When someone's heart stops in the ER, you don't scream, you act. So I did. I checked the timestamps. The first transfer was made at 11:14 p.m., the last at 12:57 a.m. The IP addresses were listed under device security logs. I clicked the location tracker. Arlington, Texas. My breath caught. I whispered, "No," but the word didn't sound like mine. My eyes darted around the room as if the walls might offer another explanation. Then memory snapped into place like a lock turning. The Wi-Fi fix. Mom's laptop. The password I'd typed in while Tyler stood in the doorway pretending not to watch. My hands went cold. They hadn't just humiliated me. They'd been planning this. I pulled my phone closer, checking my texts from earlier in the night. The message from Mom about cleaning up, the one from Tyler about regret. They were already trying to flip the script to make me the villain, the hysterical daughter who overreacted while they robbed me blind. My stomach twisted, but the nausea wasn't from fear. It was from clarity. I called the bank's emergency fraud line. The automated voice asked me to hold. Piano music played softly in the background, too calm for the moment. When a woman finally answered, her voice was professional detached. "Thank you for calling Texas First Bank. How can I help you tonight?" "Someone stole from my account," I said. My voice came out flatter than I expected. "All of it." She took my information, verified my identity, and asked for the transaction IDs. I read them out slowly, my hands shaking so badly that I had to steady the phone against my shoulder. After a long pause, she said, "Ms. Brooks, I'm seeing the transfers. They were authorized using your password and two-factor authentication." My chest tightened. That's impossible. I didn't approve anything. The system logs show confirmation from your registered device. What location? Another pause. Then Arlington, Texas. The room tilted for a second. I gripped the edge of the couch to stay upright. "That's my parents' address," I said. Her tone softened, but only slightly. "You may need to file a police report. If it's a known location, we'll need legal documentation to freeze further activity. Are the accounts still active?" "The receiving accounts were cleared within an hour." "I'm sorry." The words hit harder than any slap. After I hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, the only sound the soft tick of the kitchen clock. I tried to cry, but nothing came. It wasn't numbness, it was something colder, a clarity sharp enough to cut. I opened my laptop again and printed every page of the transaction history, every timestamp, every traceable detail. Then I opened a new folder on my desktop and titled it Evidence. It wasn't panic driving me now. It was purpose. My mind began to build a timeline. They'd invited me back not for reconciliation, but for access. They'd played family while watching me type my login credentials. The laptop wasn't broken. The Wi-Fi wasn't the problem. I was. Or rather, my trust was. I thought about calling the police right then, but I knew better. You don't go into a fight unarmed. I needed proof beyond digital logs. I needed legal precision. My phone buzzed again, another text from Tyler. "Dad says call us. You're making this worse than it is." I stared at the screen until the notification faded. Then I turned the phone face down. The window reflected my silhouette against the city lights. For years, I'd believed strength meant forgiveness. That if I just kept working harder, kept giving more, maybe they'd change. But now I understood something brutal and freeing. Some people don't change. They escalate. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance as if the storm had circled back. I went to my bedroom, pulled out the metal lockbox where I kept my nonprofit's tax documents and donor contracts. I double-checked that my backup drives were safe. They were, for now. I sat on the edge of my bed, breathing in slow, deliberate rhythms. The slap had woken something in me, but this, the theft, had turned it into focus. They hadn't just stolen my money. They had stolen my last illusion. I whispered the words I'd typed earlier just to hear them out loud. They didn't just hit me. They hacked me. The sound of it filled the room final and solid. I turned off the lamp, leaving the glow of the city as my only light. The hum of traffic outside was distant, almost peaceful. My heartbeat matched it. Even now, a small part of me wished it wasn't true, that they hadn't gone that far. But wishing was the first stage of denial, and I was done with that. Tomorrow, I told myself I would start making calls to the bank again, to a lawyer, maybe even to law enforcement. But for tonight, I let the silence sit beside me like an old companion I finally understood. Morning came without rest. I must have drifted in and out of shallow sleep because when sunlight finally slipped through the blinds, it felt intrusive, almost wrong. My head throbbed dully where my father's ring had cut into my skin. I pressed my fingers there and felt the bruise already forming tender but real. Reality always arrives quietly after chaos. You wake up and the world is still turning as if nothing happened. The city outside my window was calm, commuters, walking dogs, coffee shops, opening the hum of early traffic. It was strange to think that my entire life had shifted overnight, and yet everything looked the same. I brewed coffee and watched the steam rise, the smell both grounding and nauseating. My hands trembled when I lifted the cup. I had worked through blood and trauma in hospital rooms that reeked of antiseptic and fear, but nothing had ever made me feel as small as this, the emptiness that comes after betrayal. My phone buzzed again. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. I glanced down. Mom, you left without saying goodbye. You embarrassed your father. Another message followed almost instantly. Tyler, you need to calm down. It's not what you think. Dad's upset, but we can fix this if you stop acting crazy. The word crazy hit me harder than I expected. It was the word they'd used my whole life whenever I tried to draw a boundary. Crazy for calling the police. Crazy for refusing to send more money. Crazy for remembering the truth. I put the phone face down on the counter. I told myself to shower, to eat, to function. Routine is the illusion of control. But when I turned on the water, the sound of it against the tile reminded me of the rain pounding the car roof as I'd driven away. I stepped back, turned it off, and sat on the floor of the bathroom instead, knees drawn to my chest. My reflection in the chrome faucet looked unfamiliar, tired, older, but not broken. Not yet. Around noon, I finally gathered the courage to call the bank again. The representative confirmed what I already knew. The transfers cleared overnight. Unless law enforcement intervenes, the funds are unrecoverable. Her tone was sympathetic but detached, like she'd said the same words 100 times before. I thanked her anyway. When I hung up, the silence of my apartment pressed in again. It felt alive, almost sentient. I thought about calling the police immediately, but something inside me hesitated. The child in me, the one who had learned that authority always sided with the loudest voice, whispered, "Don't." That old conditioning runs deep. Victims of family abuse learn to question their own reality before anyone else does it for them. I stared at the bruise on my face, the evidence that no one else could twist into misunderstanding. And yet, a part of me still wanted to believe it was all a mistake. My phone buzzed once more. Mom, your father didn't mean it. He's under stress. Please don't make this worse. Then another Tyler Money's family money. Stop pretending you're better than us. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, but instead I set it gently on the coffee table. My body was too tired for rage. My mind was sharp, though sharper than it had been in years. They wanted me to respond, to beg for understanding, to fall back into the script where I apologized for making them uncomfortable. But not this time. I turned on the television, searching for white noise, and settled on a morning news show. A cheerful anchor discussed Thanksgiving recipes. The absurdity of it made me laugh, a single hollow sound that startled even me. My laugh echoed around the room like something foreign. By mid-afternoon, the numbness began to fade, replaced by a strange stillness that felt almost like focus. I gathered every document connected to my nonprofit, the grant proposals, the donor contracts, the tax statements. I placed them neatly on the dining table. The sight of them steadied me. I had built this from nothing. I could rebuild again. But I would not rebuild with silence. As I sorted through the paperwork, a memory surfaced the first time my father had called me ungrateful. I had been 11, asking him why Mom had to hide bruises. He told me to stop disrespecting him. Mom had nodded along, saying, "You'll understand when you're older." Well, I was older now. I understood perfectly. They thrived on control, and when control slipped, they punished. The apartment darkened as evening approached. I realized I hadn't eaten all day. Hunger didn't register. Instead, I picked up my phone again and opened the texts. I reread every word they'd sent me since Thanksgiving. Not one of them said, "Are you okay?" Not one of them said, "I'm sorry." Every message was about them. Their embarrassment, their anger, their denial. That told me everything I needed to know. I scrolled back to Tyler's last message. Money's family money. The arrogance of it made my stomach turn. They didn't see theft. They saw entitlement. I took a deep breath, then opened a new note on my phone and typed, "Document everything. No confrontation, no warning." I didn't know yet what I was planning, only that it started with clarity. Outside, the city lights flickered on one by one. A siren wailed in the distance, fading quickly. Somewhere, life was happening, people laughing, cooking dinner, kissing loved ones. I sat in that quiet contrast and realized I had spent my entire life living in reaction to them. My father's anger, my mother's denial, my brother's mockery, they had shaped me more than I wanted to admit. But that night, sitting alone, I decided that shaping would end. I went to the mirror again before bed. The bruise had deepened to a shadowed purple. I traced it lightly with my fingertip, not with shame, but with recognition. Proof of contact, proof of history. I whispered to the reflection, "They'll never stop until I make them stop." My own voice startled me steady, certain low. Not a threat. A promise. I lay down fully dressed, the room lit only by the glow of the streetlight filtering through the blinds. My phone buzzed one last time, another message from Mom. "Please answer. Your father's upset. Don't do something you'll regret." I didn't answer. I turned the phone off completely. The click of the power button sounded like a door closing somewhere deep inside me. As I drifted toward sleep, my mind began stitching a new kind of silence, not the one they forced on me, but the kind I chose. The silence before action, the kind that builds momentum. The day after I turned my phone off, I called in sick, and I did not feel a scrap of guilt about it. There are two kinds of exhaustion, the kind that comes from long shifts, and the kind that comes from a life that has been built on someone else's lies. I knew the second one needed different medicine. I showered, dressed in jeans and a plain sweater, and drove to the hospital because I needed a familiar anchor, and because my supervisor, Maya Sanchez, was the one person who had never treated me like a problem. She met me in the break room with a coffee in each hand and a look that said she already knew something was wrong. When I told her what happened, she listened without blinking. No judgment, no advice to patch things up, just focus. She told me to breathe, then handed me the coffee as if the cup could hold my resolve for me. Maya made the first call with me. She sat across from me in a booth-sized corner of the cafeteria, her badge glinting, her voice calm as she dialed a number. Her tone changed when she explained the situation. Nurses protect each other in ways the public never sees. Within an hour, I had the name of an attorney specializing in cyber fraud whose office was 3 blocks from the hospital. Rachel Klein answered on the second ring, and she was the kind of lawyer whose voice made you feel like the law had weight. I told her everything in one breath, the slap, the wine, the texts, the empty account, the Arlington IP. She did not sound surprised. She said, "This is not family drama. This is felony wire fraud and possibly elder financial exploitation depending on the recipients." Rachel walked me through what I needed to do and said something that felt like permission to stop performing. "Document everything. Do not confront them. Preserve your devices. Get a forensics team." She asked if I had access to the laptop I used at their house. I had left it on their desk. I wanted to call them and demand it back. Rachel stopped me before I could speak. "Do not touch anything else," she said. "Let us approach this the way a case is won methodically. If they have physical control over evidence, they might wipe it. We will get a warrant if we have probable cause." The word warrant felt like armor. It meant the law could step in and take the stage they had always owned. Rachel arranged to meet me at her office that afternoon. She wore no jewelry, nothing flashy. Her briefcase was full of folders already labeled for this case. She told me that she worked frequently with the FBI cyber unit and a local detective who handled financial crimes. We sat in her small conference room while she pulled up the PDF I had sent from the bank screenshots of the transfers, timestamps, recipient accounts. She pointed to a table of transfers and explained how transfers could be reversed in some cases if stopped quickly, but how the speed and specificity of these withdrawals signaled premeditation. Whoever did this knew exactly how to avoid triggering immediate red flags. Rachel asked me to put every communication I had with my family into one place. Texts, voicemails, emails. She explained chain of custody and why every screenshot, every file needed to be preserved in its native format. We created a folder on her encrypted drive titled Brooks Case Evidence. I sat there and watched the folder fill with artifacts of my life and the moment someone tried to steal its future. Next came forensics. Rachel connected me with Marcus, a private digital forensics specialist she trusted. He was early 40s, quiet, and smelled faintly of machine oil and coffee. Marcus walked me through what he could do and what he needed. He would image any device, meaning he would create a perfect copy of the laptop's hard drive and system logs without altering the original. If a keylogger had been installed, it could be detected in the system registry and in the file timestamps. He asked about two-factor authentication. I told him I used an authenticator app on my phone. He noted that many keyloggers are paired with notification suppression or remote forwarding, and that the IP addresses in the bank logs pointed to a router, likely their house. Rachel made the call to Detective Morales in the Arlington precinct. I could hear the gravity in her voice. Within hours, Detective Morales had scheduled a visit to the house to secure the laptop and to begin the process of obtaining a search warrant. He instructed us not to alert anyone. The last thing we wanted was to give them time to clean up. While we waited for law enforcement, Rachel worked on preparing a formal demand letter to the bank and coordinated with Marcus to schedule a time for him to create a forensic image of the laptop once the warrant was executed. She told me to do one more thing: get a written statement about every gift or wire I had ever made to them with dates. It felt absurd to catalog my own generosity as though it were a crime scene, but that's what this had become. The hours between deciding and action were strange, suspended. I kept expecting a text that said, "Sorry, a plea, anything." The messages didn't come. Instead, Tyler sent another message mocking and clipped, "Dad wants to talk." Everyone makes mistakes. Rachel advised me not to reply. She said silence could be uncomfortable to them, and silence was a kind of pressure we could use. At midnight, Detective Morales called to say they had obtained the warrant. He'd be there the next morning with a team to seize the laptop and other devices. Rachel told me to sleep if I could. I did not sleep deeply, but I slept in a way that felt like preparation. Dreams of tile floors and waiting rooms shifted into methodical lists in my head: what to say to the detective, who to call if something changed, where to find the nonprofit back files. The next morning, Detective Morales and two officers arrived at my parents' house in plain clothes. They knocked with a presence that could not be ignored. I stayed in the car down the street and watched as the officers moved through the house like surgical hands. Marcus followed with a warrant in his pocket and a camera to document everything. Inside, he found the laptop on the desk open to the slideshow screen. He attached a write block to the USB port and created a forensic image on an encrypted drive. He found anomalous software in the registry programs that logged keystrokes and forwarded them to an external IP. The timestamps matched the transfers. When Rachel finally called me with the first reports, her voice was clipped with professional satisfaction. We had enough to establish probable cause for felony charges. They had a digital smoking gun. In the echo of her words, something unspooled inside me: relief, but also a fierce, unexpected lightness. This was not just about reclaiming money. It was about refusing to be gaslit by the people who had defined my limits for me. Rachel advised patience. Charges would take time, prosecutions longer, but the bank could begin the process of tracing the funds and freezing what remained. News crews would come soon enough if the prosecutor chose to make it public. I thought about the spectacle and felt only a cold resolve. This was not a moment for catharsis, it was a moment for precision. That afternoon, I sat in Rachel's office and signed off on subpoenas and affidavits. I watched the legal system slow and lumbering begin to move for me. It did not happen all at once. It happened step by methodical step, like sutures closing a wound. That night, for the first time since the slap, I allowed myself to breathe fully. Not because the hurt had vanished, but because the hurt would not be the end of my story. They had taken a fund, but they had not taken my will. They had taken money, but they had not taken the part of me that would fight back in ways they could not imagine. The house looked smaller the second time I pulled onto that street. Maybe it was the daylight, maybe it was what I knew now. The beige siding that had once seemed harmless now looked like armor for rot. Rachel sat in the passenger seat beside me, her leather portfolio resting on her lap, a single pen tucked between her fingers like a scalpel. Behind us, Marcus followed in his car with Detective Morales. It was exactly 1 week after Thanksgiving, but the air still smelled like winter rain and tension. I parked 2 houses down far enough to watch them open their door before we approached. Rachel adjusted her glasses and said quietly, "Let me talk first. Then you speak only if necessary. The detective will do the rest." I nodded, but my hand still trembled on the steering wheel. Not from fear, from adrenaline. Morales exited his car. First, his badge tucked discreetly inside his jacket, the warrant already in his hand. He gave a small nod toward us. Rachel opened her door, heels clicking softly against the pavement as she straightened her blazer. "Ready?" she asked. "I've been ready for years," I said. We walked up the driveway together, the morning light cutting sharp lines across the porch. The doorbell echoed faintly through the house. It opened a moment later. Frank stood there, same smile, same cologne. His charm arrived before his conscience. "Elena," he said warmly, as if the past week had been a misunderstanding over dinner reservations. "We were just talking about forgiving you." His voice carried that practiced blend of concern and control. Then his gaze shifted to Rachel and confusion flickered in his eyes. "And who's this?" "This," I said evenly, "is my attorney." His smile faltered. The air between us turned brittle. He stepped aside automatically, the reflex of a man used to pretending civility. Rachel walked in first, followed by Morales and Marcus. My mother appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her expression sliding from surprise to suspicion in seconds. "Elena, what is this? What's going on?" "Evidence collection," Rachel said calmly. "We have a warrant to retrieve electronic devices connected to a case of financial fraud." The words hung there heavy as thunder. My father let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Fraud? That's absurd. You can't just barge in here throwing around accusations." Morales stepped forward, showing his badge. "We're not throwing around accusations, sir. We're enforcing a lawful warrant issued by a district judge. Please, step aside." Frank's face turned the color of old wine. "This is a family matter. Not a police matter." "No," Rachel said, her tone like glass. "It stopped being a family matter the moment you installed a keylogger on your daughter's account and stole $78,000. My mother gasped. Her eyes darted to me. "That's ridiculous," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "She must be mistaken." Rachel opened her portfolio and withdrew several printed pages. "These are transaction logs from Texas First Bank, matching wire transfers from Ms. Brooks' business account to accounts under the names Frank Brooks and Tyler Brooks. This," she continued, sliding another page forward, "is a forensic report confirming the presence of keylogging software installed on your laptop at the same time the transfers occurred." My father's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. "You can't prove that." "We already have," Rachel replied. For a long moment, no one spoke. The sound of the refrigerator hum filled the silence. I watched his expression crumble, a flicker of calculation, giving way to disbelief. Then came Tyler, shuffling into the living room in sweatpants, rubbing his eyes like a kid caught skipping school. "What the hell is going on?" he asked. When he saw me, his face hardened. "Oh!" "You had to bring the cops now?" I turned toward him. "You drained my account. I didn't touch your account," he snapped. "Dad handled that stuff." "Shut up," Frank hissed, but the damage was done. My mother's voice rose panicked. "What does he mean you handled that?" Her eyes moved between them, realization dawning like a slow burn. "Frank, what did you do?" "Nothing," he barked, but it was too late. The truth had already slipped into the room like smoke, impossible to contain. Morales moved toward the desk. "Sir, we need to collect the laptop now." "You can't just take my property," Frank protested. Morales's voice stayed level. "We can and we will. You'll receive documentation of every item collected." As the detective and Marcus began their careful routine photographing, labeling, sealing evidence bags, the tension in the room rippled like heat. Mom stood frozen towel still clutched in her hands. Tyler looked pale now, the arrogance gone. I could see the exact moment he realized the game was over. Frank tried one last play. He turned to me, dropping his voice into that rehearsed paternal tone. "Lena, sweetheart, this is a misunderstanding. Family money gets messy sometimes. You're overreacting. You're going to ruin us." "You did that yourself," I said quietly. "I just stopped helping you hide it." His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Rachel stepped closer, voice precise. "Mr. Brooks, you're being served with a formal demand for the immediate return of the stolen funds. Failure to comply will result in escalation to felony charges already under review." He looked like he might faint. My mother's breathing quickened. "Frank, tell me this isn't true," she whispered. "They're lying," he said hoarsely. "No," I said. "You are." My mother's gaze snapped to me, then to the detective. "Is this really necessary?" she asked weakly. "Can't we just talk?" Rachel shook her head. "Mrs. Brooks with respect talking is what enabled this." The front door creaked and another car pulled up. I recognized it instantly, my Aunt Valerie's Navy sedan. Rachel had notified her the night before as a cooperating witness. She stepped inside. Her expression, cool, controlled her presence, immediately changing the temperature of the room. "Well," she said, eyes scanning the scene, "it seems we're finally being honest in this house." Frank's face drained of color. "Valerie," he stammered, "you shouldn't be here." "Oh, I should," she said. "In fact, I have a few questions of my own." She turned toward Rachel. "Did you tell them about the second set of transfers?" Frank froze. Rachel nodded once. "Yes. Our forensic analysis revealed linked accounts beyond the initial 78,000. Some of those funds appear connected to retirement accounts under Ms. Valerie Brooks's name." My mother's face went blank. "Retirement accounts? $300,000, Valerie said flatly. "Gone. Every penny. He told me it was a new investment opportunity. Said he could double it in a year. Turns out he was just digging another hole to bury his lies in." Frank's composure shattered. "That's not true," he said weakly. "You don't understand, Val. I was trying to fix it. By stealing from your daughter," she cut in. "By robbing the one person who still believed in you." He went quiet, the kind of quiet that means there's nothing left to spin. Mom turned to him slowly. "You lost Valerie's money too." His silence was an answer. She stumbled back a step, the towel dropping from her hands to the floor. Morales cleared his throat. "Mr. Brooks, you're under investigation for multiple counts of wire fraud and computer crimes. You'll be contacted by the district attorney's office." He gestured toward the laptop now sealed in a plastic evidence bag. "For now, we're seizing all devices listed in the warrant." Frank sank into a chair. The fight drained out of him. "You're destroying this family," he muttered. I stared at him, my voice low but clear. "No, Dad. You did that a long time ago. The rest of us are just cleaning up the debris." For once, he didn't have a retort. Outside, I could hear the faint sound of Valerie's car door closing as she stepped back onto the porch, making a quiet call to her own attorney. Inside, Mom just stood there, hands trembling, face pale. "What happens now?" she whispered. Rachel turned to her gently. "That depends on you. If you cooperated knowingly, you'll be named. If you didn't, you'll still need to testify." Mom nodded numbly, eyes darting between Frank and me. "I didn't know," she said softly. "I swear I didn't know." For the first time, I believed her, not because she was innocent, but because denial had always been her survival mechanism. Morales finished packing the last of the evidence and turned to Frank. "You'll need to come with us to provide a statement." Frank didn't resist. He just looked at me one last time, the arrogance gone replaced by something pitiful fear. "You think you've won?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I met his eyes. "No, I just stopped losing." He looked away first. As they led him out, the morning sun spilled through the front windows, catching the dust motes in the air. For the first time in my life, this house smelled clean. Not because it was, but because the truth had finally aired out the rot. Rachel closed her folder and turned to me. "You handled that perfectly," she said. "Now the real work begins. Trials are slow. Justice isn't cinematic. But it's coming." I nodded. My throat ached, but not from tears. From release. When the door shut behind the officers, Mom sank into a chair at the dining table. Her voice came small. "What happens to us now?" "You start over," I said, "without him." "And you?" she asked. "I already did." Valerie stepped back inside, then papers in hand, her expression softened slightly when she looked at me. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "Even if it took everything to do it. It didn't take everything I said. It gave me something back." She nodded, once understanding. As we stepped outside, the neighborhood was still the kind of suburban calm that hides every secret. I could feel the weight lift off me slow but steady. Not joy, just air. I watched the police car disappear around the corner, its reflection flickering across the wet pavement. For a moment, I stood there, the wind tugging at my hair, the sun catching on the bruise that had faded to yellow, and I thought of every time I'd been told to stay silent, every apology I'd given to people who never earned it. That silence ended here. Rachel placed a hand on my shoulder. "You ready to head back?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah. But before we go, I want one more look." I turned back toward the house, the porch where my father had smoked cigars, the window where my mother used to wave goodnight, the cracked driveway where Tyler had once learned to ride his bike. It was all just scenery now, the set of a story that no longer owned me. "They called it a family dispute," I murmured. "But this is justice." Rachel didn't say anything. She didn't have to. As we walked toward the car, the faint sound of a church bell echoed from somewhere down the street, sharp and clear, a reminder that even in small towns, truth carries. Justice does not roar. It grinds. It moves slow, deliberate, methodical, like a machine built to test your patience before it rewards your endurance. The days after my father's arrest felt like living in the eye of a hurricane. The quiet where destruction pauses just long enough to let you hear yourself breathe. The media found out within 48 hours. It started with a local headline that spread faster than I could process Arlington man arrested for cyber theft from daughter's nonprofit. The words didn't look real even as I stared at them on my phone screen. Then came the reporters, the cameras parked outside my apartment building, the phone calls from journalists asking for statements. I refused all of them. Rachel handled every inquiry with a line she'd crafted perfectly. "Ms. Brooks has no comment at this time." She trusts the judicial process. The judicial process took months. Frank was charged with 2 counts of felony wire fraud, 1 count of computer crimes, and an additional count of financial elder abuse for the money stolen from Aunt Valerie. Tyler was named an accessory. My mother was called as a cooperating witness after she admitted under oath that she knew something was off but chose to ignore it. The courtroom was small and cold, the kind of space that doesn't allow for drama, just facts. When I walked in for the first hearing, every eye turned toward me. I could feel their whispers behind me, that strange blend of pity and fascination, reserved for people who survive the unimaginable but still show up to tell it. My father sat at the defense table, smaller than I'd ever seen him. His tan had faded his hair thinner, his face lined not with age but exposure. For years, he had built himself on stories, on control, on charisma. But in that fluorescent light, there was nowhere left for the performance to live. He looked like any other man who'd finally run out of lies. When the judge asked for my testimony, my hands didn't shake. My voice didn't waver. I told the story plainly, the dinner, the slap, the keylogger, the theft. Every word landed like a nail sealing a coffin. The defense tried to spin it as a family misunderstanding, claiming my father had intended to borrow the funds and that the keylogger had been accidentally installed. Rachel dismantled that narrative with surgical precision, presenting Marcus's forensic analysis that showed deliberate code insertion password captures and IP address matching. The courtroom fell silent when the timestamps were displayed on the overhead screen. Each keystroke recorded each wire transfer executed all from their home network between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. The truth was undeniable. Aunt Valerie's testimony came next. Her calm fury filled the room. She described how my father had convinced her to invest her retirement in a tech startup complete with forged documents and fake email chains. The jury didn't need dramatics. They just needed to see what greed looked like when it wore the face of family. By the time the prosecutor finished, even the court reporter had stopped looking neutral. The verdict came after only 3 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Frank Brooks, 61, sentenced to 5 years probation restitution of the stolen funds through the forced sale of his property and 300 hours of community service. Tyler was given 18 months probation and ordered to attend financial ethics counseling. My mother, though spared criminal charges, was subpoenaed to complete a course in witness responsibility and financial literacy. The house, the oversized hollow suburban monument to denial, was seized and auctioned within a month. The proceeds went to repay what was owed. I received my full $78,000 back. Valerie recovered most of her $300,000. The rest was gone forever. The day the judgment was finalized, the courthouse steps were lined with cameras again. Reporters asked how it felt to win. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. Justice isn't victory. It's just closure wearing legal paperwork. I walked past them without speaking. Rachel handled the press as always, and Morales nodded at me as I passed him in the hallway, a quiet gesture of respect that meant more than any headline. The fallout spread wider than I expected. My father's name appeared on local news, then national blogs about financial crime. Former clients came forward claiming similar deceptions. His reputation collapsed faster than he had ever built it. The man who once bragged about networking now had no one left to call. My mother moved into a small apartment across town. Tyler disappeared for a while, then resurfaced online posting cryptic messages about family betrayal that no one believed. The extended family stayed silent. Some sent emails that began with, "We had no idea," others just disappeared entirely. Silence again, but this time it wasn't mine. I remember the sentencing day clearly. The judge asked if I wanted to make a victim's statement. I hadn't planned to, but when I stood there looking at my father one last time, the words came easily. "You taught me that silence keeps families together," I said. "But you were wrong. Silence just keeps abusers comfortable. You taught me that loyalty means forgiveness. You were wrong again. Loyalty without accountability is just servitude. You taught me that family comes first no matter what. And that one, unfortunately, you were right about. Family did come first, just not yours." The judge had to call for order when the audience reacted a mix of gasps and quiet applause. My father didn't look up once. Later, outside the courthouse, Rachel handed me a manila envelope. "Official copy," she said. "Keep it somewhere safe." I held it like something fragile but finished. "What now?" I asked. She smiled slightly. "Now you live." Living wasn't easy at first. Healing never is. The first week after the verdict, I found myself waking at 3 a.m. out of habit, waiting for the next crisis. There wasn't one. The quiet felt strange. I kept expecting a text, a new manipulation, a guilt trip. None came. My phone stayed silent, and that silence became my proof of freedom. The nonprofits board, after reading the full case summary, decided to promote me to executive director. They said the way I'd handled the crisis tracking evidence, coordinating legal steps, protecting donor trust proved I had leadership instincts beyond the clinical. I didn't argue. I just nodded. Leadership was never what I wanted, but survival had turned out to be good training. A month after sentencing, I stood in front of our small team in the new office space in East Dallas. The walls were white bright, covered in motivational posters that actually meant something now. We had just secured a larger grant from a medical foundation that had followed my case in the news. Irony wasn't lost on me. My father's theft had nearly destroyed me, but the exposure of his crime had brought more attention and funding to the very cause he tried to drain. When people asked how I felt about it, I said the truth. Grateful, but not forgiving. Forgiveness, I had learned, was not a gift you give to people who destroy trust. It's a peace you build once you're safe from them. A week later, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a letter written in my father's handwriting. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. It began predictably. "I made mistakes. I overextended. I borrowed. Never the words I stole." He blamed stress, the economy, his desire to take care of the family. The last line made me laugh, a small, sharp sound that startled me in the quiet apartment. "I hope one day you'll understand that everything I did for us." That line was the purest distillation of his delusion. I folded the letter, placed it in a file labeled "closed," and locked it away. Some chapters don't end with understanding, they end with boundaries. The next morning, Aunt Valerie came by the office. She looked more at peace than I had seen her in years. "You know," she said, sipping coffee, "when I first found out what he did, I thought I'd never sleep again. Now I sleep like a baby." I smiled. "That's the sound of accountability," I said. She laughed softly. "You should trademark that." She was half joking, half serious, and we both knew it. My mother sent one email 3 months later. It was long, filled with guilt and apologies that read more like confessions. She said she had started therapy. She said she hoped someday I might visit. I wrote back exactly one sentence: I forgive you, but I don't trust you. That was all there was to say. The story faded from the headlines by spring, replaced by newer scandals. But every now and then, someone would recognize my name. "You're that nurse, right? The one whose dad—" They never finished the sentence, and I never made them. I'd just nod and say, "Yes, the one who rebuilt." By summer, the bruise on my cheek had long since healed, but I could still feel it, sometimes phantom-like, whenever I caught my reflection in certain light. It reminded me that pain, when faced head-on, becomes instruction. It teaches you where not to return. One afternoon, after a long board meeting, I walked out of the office into the sunlight. Rachel called to tell me that the final restitution payments had cleared. My accounts were whole again. But more than that, my life was finally balanced, not financially, but morally. I thanked her and ended the call. The city skyline shimmered in the distance. I thought about everything that had been taken and everything I had reclaimed. Justice had not roared, but it had arrived. And that was enough. The first thing I noticed when peace returned was the quiet. Not the heavy, watchful quiet I grew up with, but the gentle kind that feels earned. My apartment no longer felt like a waiting room between disasters. The plants on the windowsill were alive again, the fridge was full, and the air didn't taste like adrenaline. I used to think healing would come in some dramatic revelation, a sunrise moment where everything felt new. Instead, it came slowly through the small rituals that rebuilt my life. Coffee brewed without trembling hands, music playing just because I liked it, the sound of laughter that wasn't forced. A year after the trial, my nonprofit had expanded into something real. We called it Phoenix Haven. The name came from a nurse on our team who said, "We don't rebuild what burned, we rise from it." It fit. Our mission was simple: provide training and emergency support for women leaving abusive homes and for healthcare workers handling trauma victims. It was the kind of work that turned pain into structure. Every policy, every course, every checklist we wrote came from lessons I had learned the hardest way possible. People called me the founder, but I preferred survivor in recovery. Titles never mattered as much as purpose. Rachel joined our advisory board as legal counsel, volunteering her time twice a month. Her presence brought a kind of balance, sharp, calm, unyielding. She taught our members how to navigate legal systems, how to document safely, how to build paper trails when their stories were being erased by people in power. Watching her work reminded me why I trusted her from the start. She never used pity, she used precision. Aunt Valerie handled our finances. When I told her I wanted her to be CFO, she laughed. "You realize I'm retired, right?" "Then consider this semi-retirement," I said, "and consider it poetic justice." She agreed. She came to every board meeting with her tidy binder of color-coded tabs, the same meticulous energy she once used to track the savings my father destroyed. Seeing her behind that desk, strong, methodical, unbent, felt like a quiet victory that didn't need applause. We ran training sessions for survivors of financial abuse, teaching them how to rebuild credit, open independent accounts, and recognize coercive control disguised as love. The irony of teaching others how to escape what I'd survived wasn't lost on me. But each story that came through our doors reminded me that pain, when shared, becomes purpose. Tyler reached out once 6 months after the sentencing. His message was short. "I messed up. I'm sorry." I read it twice, then archived it. Forgiveness is a door I can choose to keep locked. I didn't hate him. Hate takes too much energy. I just stopped feeding the connection that once drained me dry. My mother visited the center once quietly without warning. She stood in the lobby looking out of place in her neat cardigan and nervous smile. I saw her reflection in the glass before she saw me. "Hi, Mom," I said. She turned eyes wet. "It's beautiful here," she whispered. "You're helping people." I nodded. "That's the point." She hesitated, fingers twisting the strap of her purse. "I started therapy," she said softly. Real therapy this time. Not the kind where you just talk about forgiving everyone. I'm learning to stop making excuses. Her voice broke on the last word. For a moment, I saw not the mother who had defended him, but the woman who had been trapped longer than I ever was. "I'm proud of you," I said, and I meant it. We didn't hug, we didn't need to. She left with a pamphlet from our front desk one that said in bold letters, "You're allowed to start over." My life became structured around creation instead of crisis. Mornings started early with coffee on the balcony and ended late with laughter in our shared workspace. Our team grew to 15 people: nurses, therapists, social workers, and volunteers who had their own versions of escape. Each of them carried scars, visible or not, and each of them understood the language of survival without translation. One night, after a long day of grant writing, Valerie and I sat in the conference room surrounded by empty coffee cups and glowing screens. She leaned back in her chair and said, "You know, your father used to say money was power." I looked up from my laptop. "He was half right," I said. "Money is power when it's stolen, but when it's used to build, it's freedom." She smiled. "You really are his opposite." I thought about that for a long time after she left. Maybe she was right. Or maybe I was just what happens when someone refuses to become their origin story. By the end of the year, Phoenix Haven launched a partnership with the local trauma unit at the hospital where I still worked part-time. It felt like coming full circle. The same ER that once felt like my escape now became part of my rebuilding. Maya, my supervisor, still left 2 coffees on my desk every morning, just like she had on the day everything started. Some rituals are worth keeping. On the 1-year anniversary of the trial, I hosted a small dinner at the center for our staff and closest supporters. No reporters, no speeches, just a quiet meal shared among people who had earned their peace. As the night ended, I stood by the window watching the lights of Dallas flicker in the distance. The city looked cleaner somehow, not because it was, but because I had finally stopped carrying its shadows. Rachel walked up beside me, holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. "To peace," she said. I smiled. "To boundaries," I replied. We clinked glasses. When I went home that night, I opened my journal, the one I'd started after the trial. I flipped to the first page and read the words I had written in shaky pen a year ago. They didn't just hit me. They hacked me. Then I turned to the last page and added a line beneath it. "But I rebuilt myself piece by piece, and now they can't reach me." I closed the journal and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not relief, not victory, but balance. The kind that comes from knowing the worst part of your story is finally behind you. The kind that whispers you're safe now. 1 year later, I stood in front of 30 women in a sunlit room at Phoenix Haven. The walls were painted pale blue, soft and calm, and the morning light slanted through the blinds in narrow stripes across the polished floor. Outside, the hum of Dallas life moved on as usual, but inside, there was a hush, the quiet of women who had seen too much and survived anyway. Some clutched coffee mugs, others held notebooks. All of them carried stories heavy enough to sink ships, but somehow they were still afloat. It was my turn to speak. I never liked speeches. For years, I spoke in data, in metrics, in the language of control. But now the only numbers that mattered were the ones that represented lives restarted. I took a deep breath and began. A year ago, I thought survival meant silence. I thought if I just stayed small, stayed polite, stayed predictable, maybe I could be safe. But the truth is, silence isn't safety, it's surrender. The moment I stopped being quiet, I started healing. The women looked up. Some nodded, some didn't. They didn't have to. Understanding was its own kind of applause. I told them about the Thanksgiving dinner, the glass, the slap, the theft, the trial. Not in cinematic detail, just enough truth to draw the line from who I was to who I had become. When you grow up in a family that teaches you love is earned through pain, you forget what peace feels like. You start mistaking exhaustion for devotion. But the moment you decide to stop explaining your worth to people committed to misunderstanding it, everything changes. A murmur rippled through the room. One woman in the back wiped her eyes. Another whispered something to the woman beside her who reached over and took her hand. I looked at them and felt the familiar ache in my chest, the one that comes from recognition. Trauma may wear different names, but it always speaks the same language. After the session ended, I stayed behind stacking chairs, letting the silence settle again. I looked at the whiteboard on the wall where someone had written our motto in marker, "Rise, don't return." I traced the words with my finger. It wasn't just a slogan, it was a lifeline. Every story that entered our doors was another chance to rewrite the ending. Some days the work broke me open all over again. Other days it healed me in ways I didn't expect. But every day it reminded me that resilience is not built in peace, it's built in recovery. That afternoon, I walked to the garden behind the center. It was small, just a patch of wildflowers and a bench, but it was ours. I sat there with a cup of tea, watching sunlight catch on the petals, and thought about how far I'd come. I thought about the girl who once flinched at every sharp sound, who measured love in apologies, who thought peace meant pleasing others. She was gone. In her place was someone who had learned to draw boundaries and call them freedom. Sometimes I still caught myself wondering about them. My father, my mother, my brother. I didn't check on them, but occasionally news found its way to me. Frank had completed his community service hours at a local shelter. Irony has a cruel sense of humor. Tyler was working somewhere out of state last I heard. Mom was still in therapy, slowly untangling the years of denial she once called devotion. I didn't wish them harm. I didn't wish them anything. Indifference, I'd discovered, was the truest form of peace. That night, after closing up the office, I drove through the city. The lights blurred against the windshield like constellations that refused to hold still. I passed the courthouse where it all began, the hospital where I'd worked my first trauma shift, the quiet streets of Arlington I hadn't driven through since the day I walked away. Each place felt smaller now, as if my perspective had grown and left them behind. Healing doesn't erase your past, it just makes it smaller than your future. I stopped at a diner on the edge of the city, the same one where I'd met Aunt Valerie the morning after the theft. She was waiting for me at our usual booth, coffee already poured, her ledger-sized planner open in front of her. "You're late," she said, but her tone was playful. "You've been keeping me waiting for exactly 1 year." "Worth the wait," I said, sliding into the seat. We talked about the center, about her new accounting volunteers, about Rachel's upcoming seminar on digital safety. Valerie listened with quiet pride, her eyes shining just enough to betray how much it meant to her. "You know," she said after a pause, "your father used to tell me that family means obligation. But I think he got the definition wrong. Family means choice. And you chose well." I smiled. I did. This time, I built mine. When I drove home later, the city lights gave way to the steady rhythm of the highway. The hum of the tires felt like meditation. I thought about how many people had told me to forgive, to move on, to be the bigger person. But no one ever tells you that letting go of someone doesn't mean you wish them well, it just means you wish yourself peace. At home, I walked into the quiet apartment and turned on the small lamp near the window. My desk was cluttered with grant proposals, thank you cards, and photos from our latest workshop. One photo caught my attention, a group shot from our first graduation ceremony. Dozens of women smiling, holding certificates that represented not just training, but proof that survival can be turned into structure. I pinned it to the corkboard above my desk and stared at it for a long time. Those faces, mine among them, were a map of endurance. Near midnight, I opened my journal again. The same one I'd written in during the trial, the one that started with pain and ended with purpose. I flipped to the last page, then kept writing. Healing is not forgiveness. It's reclaiming the parts of you that were taken and refusing to let pain narrate your future. I thought I'd lost everything the night my account was emptied, but what they took forced me to rebuild, and what I rebuilt can't be stolen. I closed the book and placed it beside the small ceramic phoenix that one of our volunteers had made me a symbol of the name we now wore proudly. The next morning, sunlight poured through the window, gold and warm. I made breakfast slowly, without rushing, without checking my phone. Peace, I had learned, isn't quiet because nothing happens. It's quiet because you stop waiting for the next explosion. When I arrived at the center, the parking lot was already half full. Inside, the sound of voices filled the space. New applicants, counselors greeting each other, the steady hum of rebuilding lives. Rachel stopped me in the hallway. "You got a minute?" she asked. I nodded. She handed me an envelope. "It's from the State Recognition Board," she said. "Phoenix Haven's being honored next month for community service impact." I blinked. "You're serious?" "Completely. I nominated you myself," she said with a grin. "You deserve it." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "No." We deserve it. That night, after everyone left, I stood alone in the training room again. The whiteboard still bore the same phrase as before Rise, don't return. I picked up a marker and added another line beneath it. And when you rise, bring others with you. I stepped back, looked at the words, and felt something shift deep inside. Not a surge of triumph, but a steady pulse of contentment. The kind that comes from knowing you've built something good from the wreckage. The world outside continued unaware that a small group of women in Dallas were quietly rewriting what survival meant. No headlines, no fanfare, just resilience growing where silence once lived. And I realized that was the real ending, not the trial, not the restitution, not even the recognition. It was this. Ordinary days built from extraordinary endurance. Sometimes I still hear echoes of my father's voice in memory, his tone sharp with entitlement, his words slurred by denial. But the echo fades faster now. It no longer shakes me. It reminds me of what I survived and what I refused to become. I don't hate him anymore. I just outgrew the language of people who mistake control for love. As the sky outside darkened, I turned off the lights one by one until the building was bathed in soft shadow. I stood by the door and whispered the final truth I had learned through it all. After Thanksgiving, I checked my account. It was empty. But now, my life is full. I locked the door, stepped outside, and let the cool night air fill my lungs. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It whispers. Sometimes revenge isn't chaos, it's peace. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight back. It's to walk away and never look behind you again. If you've ever had to rebuild after family broke you, if you've ever chosen peace over obligation, this is your reminder you're not alone. Share your story in the comments, and remember, protecting your peace isn't betrayal, it's survival. If you're still here, still watching after all these minutes, maybe this story hit too close to home. Maybe you've had a Thanksgiving that ended in silence instead of laughter, or a family gathering that broke something in you that words couldn't fix. If that's you, listen closely. What happened to Elena isn't just a story, it's a mirror. For every person who's been told to forgive and forget, for every child who became the adult that holds everyone else together. This is your reminder. You don't owe your peace to people who thrive on your pain. You don't have to explain your worth to those who profit from your guilt. Protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's sacred. If you've ever walked away from people who taught you love through control, if you've ever had to rebuild after family broke you, you're not alone. Drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what strength looks like where you are. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to know that leaving isn't weakness, it's wisdom. The truth is, not everyone deserves a seat at your table just because they share your blood. Sometimes family is found in the people who show up when everyone else disappears. Sometimes healing starts with a blocked number and a deep breath. And sometimes the bravest act of love you'll ever perform is the one you give yourself. If this story resonated with you, hit like, subscribe, and share it. Not for the algorithm, but for the next person scrolling through their own heartbreak, wondering if it's okay to finally stop forgiving people who never say sorry. Tell them yes, it's okay, because silence isn't peace until it's chosen, and peace, real peace, is worth fighting for.